It's that time of year. Wave 2. What happens next with L'Jarius Sneed today on Locked On Chiefs?
From the land of the free and the home of the Chiefs, this is the Locked On Chiefs podcast.
Welcome back, Chiefs Nation. Appreciate you guys being here everywhere, wherever you are today. Your first listen, we appreciate you making it us here on Locked On Chiefs, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. That means your team every single day, starting here on YouTube, where Matt Derrick is joining me today from ChiefsDigest.com. Give you the lowdown on where we see everything. You can like, sub, and hit the bell here on YouTube. You can join us on Spotify, as well as Apple or any audio platform, because we are free 5 days a week plus for everyone. We appreciate if you get subbed on multiple platforms. I don't want you guys to miss anything because everything happens for a reason. Something will happen in the middle of the night coming this next week, I'm absolutely sure, and I will be here to cover it for you. Matt will be on Chiefs Digest as well. That's where he runs the site. Also, his channel here on the YouTube platform called Chiefs Digest. I'm Ryan Tracy, the founder of Rogue Analytics and Performance Consulting. The Athletic Matrix is just about ready. You can pre-order now. The draft guide is coming at Rogue APC. You can pre-order that starting next week. We have a ton of information there. NFL 33 is where I build all my team. We're talking about team building, not necessarily in Kansas City, but around the NFL. So sub over at NFL33.com as well. And then RGR Football is where you can hear me ramble on, dig into the tape. And we like to dig deep over there. So it's not a podcast show, definitely different, but check that out as well. Matt's here. We're going to give you what the draft movement might look like for this team as we get closer to draft day. What do you have to do to round out this roster? That's coming up in the second segment here in just a bit. But we have to start with the biggest question of the day, Matt. And it seems it's the big question of every day since Chris Jones signed his contract. The scenarios are plentiful, but right now there's absolutely no traction going on with L'Jarius Sneed. If you had to pick right now today, as we record on March 19th, does L'Jarius Sneed play for this team in 2024?
I mean, it's still possible. I mean, but how much of a percentage is it? It's tough for me to break it down right now because, there's obviously the chance that L'Jarius Sneed plays under the franchise tag, the chance that L'Jarius Sneed plays under a long-term contract with the Chiefs, which I think is less than playing under the franchise tag. There's even a chance L'Jarius Sneed doesn't play this season. Then in addition to the other Chiefs withdraw the franchise tag, the Chiefs trade L'Jarius Sneed. I mean, there are multiple options here. So it's not like there's any one solution that you can point to. And so I don't think there's anything that I would say is a 50-50 proposition at this point. I mean, there's a lot of different possibilities that are out there. And a lot of it's because what we know versus what we believe is very limited information. I mean, what we know is that L'Jarius Sneed's been franchise tagged. The Chiefs say they would like to have him back. L'Jarius Sneed says he wants to be back in Kansas City, but everything else is just kind of believe we know, because we don't have names attached to the information that we're getting. We don't have multiple sources with the information, that we're getting. So when you start talking about putting on your big J journalism hat, it's just mostly speculation at this point. And granted, informed speculation. But that's really where we're at, and that leaves the picture kind of muddy. But the situation is L'Jarius Sneed wants to be paid as one of the top corners in the league, and no one right now is there to give him that money that he wants. The Chiefs are among those teams that, would like to have L'Jarius Sneed, but not at a $20 million plus for multiple years. We believe now that the price for L'Jarius Sneed might be down. One time you were talking about, the hope that the Chiefs could get a second round pick, maybe plus for L'Jarius Sneed. Now, the belief that maybe the Chiefs might have to settle for a third and maybe even not a second pick to go along with it, depending on what it is. And there's always a possibility that what the Chiefs might get back is a third next year if they just let him play under the franchise tag and try to let him be a comp pick next year. But I don't think there's any doubt. I mean, what's holding up anything happening with L'Jarius is mostly on L'Jarius. It's up to him as far as, making the decision about what he truly wants to make and where he wants to make it. Because I don't necessarily believe that making $20 million plus is possible. And as long as he's on that position, and if that's where his position is, then nothing is going to happen.
That's kind of how I feel about it too. Like, I think if there's a decent deal on the table with a team, I think they have to try to make that work because a lot of folks are counting on a near draft or a draft day solution to this quandary. I just don't see that. I feel like the least likely scenario is that he plays for this team on the tag. That just seems wasteful all the way around. He is by far the best available cornerback prospect in free agency across this league. And by, I think, pulling back a little bit from demands, it will allow him to get something done. I agree with you. I don't think the contract is out there for him to have an APY above this franchise tag for any team. And I do think that there are some options. I have, like you said, informed speculation. I know of at least 3 teams that have been interested. I don't know to what extent, and I wouldn't share it if I did because I can't confirm anything. But I know you have similar thoughts as well. It feels like that's enough total momentum in interest to get something done. So I fall more on the side of the fence that L'Jarius plays for someone else in 2024. If you had to flip a coin right now, which side would you come down on?
Yeah, I mean, for me, I think that's the plurality option at this point. I mean, like I said, it's not more than 50%. I had to write down the calculations, which I should do here, Ryan, just at some point to really put my butt on the line. I mean, I think that's the most likely outcome. But then you just look at it and you see the difficulties in that happening because, again, it's the right team with the right amount of money and L'Jarius wanting to go there. Does a team like the Commanders and the Patriots that have a lot of money available under the cap, do they want to spend that money on a player like L'Jarius Sneed? Do you need to put your money elsewhere? And, once again, I mean, is there any team willing to pay him $20 million or more? Right now, I mean, I think if that were the case, a deal would be done. And that's, where you're really running into. But to your point about, deadlines making deals, and if the draft is some type of deadline, I mean, squeezing in a guy like that at the trade on draft weekend, I mean, now there's some similarities into it, like a Frank Clark, because the Chiefs made that trade with Frank Clark before the draft in 2019, but that was also Monday, I think, when that trade went down. So that was the culmination of a couple of weeks of work. That wasn't just getting the deal done before the draft, but the only thing with dealing with the draft was that you had to have the draft picks to get that deal done. So the trade wasn't going to happen in May because Seattle wanted the draft picks. So, that's how you have to get it to work. So, I mean, that's the one thing about the draft that at least makes it a deadline is that, the Chiefs don't want a 2025 draft pick necessarily for L'Jarius Sneed. But it's not going to be like the same compensation of a Frank Clark. So does that, give you a little bit more wiggle room? But then again, I mean, you look at the Chiefs side of the equation. The Chiefs don't want to just give away L'Jarius Sneed or let him walk away for free when they could use him this year for $19.8 million to go for a three-peat. So it's not like that they're completely indifferent and don't want L'Jarius at all. I mean, they'd like to have L'Jarius, but just under certain circumstances, and certainly not at 4 years for $85 million.
Right. That's the hardest part to get to. So you have to prepare for both instances. You have to get ready to make sure that you don't have to do any one thing in this draft. How do they round out the roster going forward in this second phase of free agency, knowing about L'Jarius Sneed? We're going to get that right after this here on the Locked On Podcast Network. Passion, drive, patience. It brings the trophy home, just like the Chiefs have. And it can also affect your main vehicle, your ride or die. eBay Motors has everything that you need to maintain that vehicle, give it its peak performance, as well as over-the-top superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED lights, everything to make it speedy, powerful, and stylish, all at eBay Motors because they have you covered. Over 122 million parts for your or die, and you'll always find exactly what you're looking for because eBay has a guaranteed fit. Your part will fit your ride every single time or your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're not burning cash. You're burning rubber. At least you're trying to. With all the parts that you need and the pieces that you want, it's easy to turn your car into an MVP and bring home that win. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions do apply. Guaranteed fit is available for U.S. customers only. Folks, make sure you check out the Locked On Sports Today feed. It is 24/7 here on YouTube as well as on Amazon Fire TV, where you can find my show, this show, all shows, rotating through on our 24/7 sports coverage at Locked On Sports today. Enjoy that. I enjoy the aspect of team building because it's one of the things the Chiefs have done very, very well in order to get to this point where they're chasing this repeat. But the challenges are so plentiful, it makes it that much more difficult. And the philosophy that I really enjoy that I see the Chiefs implementing again, and you tell me if you disagree, is that they get to the point where Brett Veach and his staff build out a roster so that if you only had to pick one guy on draft weekend, you'd be able to go to the season with a functional roster. Everything else is gravy, and I like that approach, but there's still some gaps here. If you had one area of emphasis at this point, Matt, knowing the signings that they have made, what is that right now on this roster?
Well, I know the one thing that the Chiefs have had on their checklist that they haven't checked off yet is a left tackle. And it's not even just a starting left tackle, but, somebody to compete. I mean, they want somebody that can, at the very minimum, come in and push Wanye Morris to, push him to be a better player so that, it's just not like handed to him. I mean, that's one of the things that, Brett Veach kind of mentioned at the Combine wanting is, it's not that they necessarily need somebody to come in and start immediately. That's not necessarily plan A, but, they want to see what's available. And, there are certain things that are not going to be on the table for them. I mean, you look at the deal that Tyron Smith ended up getting with the Jets. Chiefs had no interest in a deal like that. I mean, they're going to be looking for somebody who's much more affordable. And like I said, I mean, it's either somebody who's going to push Wanye, if not be somebody who can start, but just a competition level player at that position. I think there's a few other spots they're going to be looking at too, especially, even though they've pretty much brought back their entire defensive tackle group, they still would like another edge rusher or two. And those could be guys. I mean, Mike Dana is still out there, looking for a deal. So maybe he still comes back to the Chiefs. I could see them, and once again, it's not necessarily that they're looking for a $15 million player. I mean, they're looking for a role player, somebody who can come in and be the rotation behind, George Karlaftis. I mean, still not necessarily expecting for Charles Omenihu to be a big force this year, but you obviously have your first round draft pick in Felix Anudike-Uzomah. So that's another place where you just want some depth. But, other than that, you're absolutely right. I mean, the Chiefs want to be, and Brett Veach always wants to say, he says, you want to be able to go out and play a football game before you go into the draft. So, you're really just reinforcing yourself. You're not trying to fill holes. And they're really in that spot right now.
One spot that I am clearly more concerned now than the Chiefs appear to be is that backup swing interior player. The departure of Nick Allegretti, I think, is being underplayed in terms of its significance on how well you can go to season with an offensive line group. Now, I know there's plenty of prospects come the draft, but do you feel that is a priority for them at this stage, or should it be?
I don't sense that it's a huge priority. I mean, I certainly, if you look out there and if the Chiefs see, hey, there's a veteran, even, a guy to have his first contract that maybe has slipped through the cracks a little bit that they feel like can help them out. I think they would be interested, but I think there's two parts to it. One is that they feel like Mike Caliendo is ready to be the next Nick Allegretti, that he's a guy who can play all three interior line positions if needed in a heartbeat. So they don't feel like that they're, in a bad position there. And two, they kind of feel like, especially with interior linemen, that they're kind of the way that, Dave Merritt is at cornerback. They feel like, you give Andy Heck some lumps of clay that he can turn them into the players that they want. If you see that, I mean, obviously Nick Allegretti was a 6th round pick. I mean, they've had success with even other guys who were undrafted. I mean, Andrew Wiley was one of those guys, was an undrafted lineman that they turned into that. So, they haven't had a problem where, the idea that they feel like that they can take late round picks, they can take undrafted players and turn them into good interior players. So, I don't necessarily think that's a position where they feel like they need to throw a lot of resources money-wise, but could that be a position that they look in the draft? Absolutely, especially in the late rounds.
I think the offense is probably one that we spend more time on because of the prolific nature of the holes that are there at left tackle and wide receiver, clearly. But I think maintaining what has been a renaissance on the defensive side, I think, is even more important, because there's only a couple of things you got to get done on offense, in my opinion. Yes, they're big things, but they're not that numerous. Whereas I do feel especially if L'Jarius Sneed is not on this roster in 2024. There are more things that you need to get done, including an interior pass rusher. Yes, they re-signed most of their defensive line room. I still don't think that upgrades their pass rush next to Chris Jones. I think you need another interior rusher because my expectation is that when Charles Menahue returns, he'll play mostly outside at this point. So I want that. But I think the other thing that's been underappreciated is that by my estimation, the guy that's going to fill in the gaps at the second level and be someone that can come in and play multiple positions when he has to, but certainly has to be able to do a little bit of everything, is Cam Jones because of the departure of Willie Gay. And they like Jack Cochran. They like Cole Christensen. They're going to let them play special teams. I understand that. It's Cam Jones's job right now, in my opinion, for the fourth linebacker that will be pressed into playing with any injury or any delay. Do you read it the same way? And do you think that demands an upgrade?
Well, and that's where, you really get into the team building elements and the angles. And that to me is the linebacker group is a really critical one because it's not even just 24. When the Chiefs signed Drew Tranquill to that multiple year contract, the first thing that struck out to me was, okay, now the Chiefs have insurance for 25 and 26 now if Nick Bolton doesn't come back. Even though Drew Tranquill is going to be older than you would prefer in that position, I mean, at least they feel like, hey, they've got a guy who can be the middle linebacker, who can set the defense and be a leader on that team if Nick Bolton doesn't return. So, that kind of fills that spot. But then you're right. I mean, if Drew Tranquill fills that role, who is behind him? And you're right. I mean, Cam Jones is another one of those players that, fits into that category we talked about, that when you're paying Patrick Mahomes and Chris Jones and Travis Kelce and, you're going to figure out what you're going to do with Sneed and Trent McDuffie and, Nick Bolton and Trey Smith and Creed Humphrey. When you're trying to figure out, well, you can't pay everybody $6 million a year. You're going to need some guys like Cam Jones that are undrafted guys that you develop. So that is absolutely, I mean, even though they've got a lot of linebackers under contract, to me, it's more about who do you picture that linebacker group being in 25 and 26? And, where are you going to use those draft picks? And when I say that, I almost want to circle back to what we were talking about with the guard too, because, right now in that trio with Nick Bolton, with Creed Humphrey, with Trey Smith, all three of them are potential free agents next year. You've got one franchise tag, and you've got none of them signed right now. And Trey Smith, based on the market, is going to be a $20 million player if healthy. So, yeah, I mean, what do you do? I mean, right now at this point, Creed Humphrey looks to be cheaper than Trey Smith will be based on where the market is.
Right.
So, so you're going to have some decisions to make there, and that's also going to play into this year's draft because, if you're planning on not having a Trey Smith in 25, or you're worried about not having Creed Humphrey in 25, that's a position that you're probably going to need to circle in this year's draft because you want to draft a year ahead. You don't always want to be drafting. Chiefs got really lucky when they drafted Creed and Trey and that they were able to immediately step into the lineup and start. That's not going to happen every year. I mean, usually you need to be prepared a year in advance. So, if center or guard in an interior position of the draft was at a premium for them for this year's draft, that wouldn't surprise me.
Premiums in the draft. That's what makes it all go round. And there's a couple of scenarios here. One thing I'll tell you for certain, folks, the Chiefs are not drafting at every position that they're currently in. That's all I know for certain. We're going to run down the possibilities coming up next on the Locked On Podcast Network. Say goodbye to busted brackets because FanDuel lets you bet on every game in this tournament whenever you want. Whether you're betting on an upset or the one seed, it's time to go dancing with America's #1 sportsbook, and that is FanDuel. Right now, new customers are getting $200 in bonus bets. If your first bet wins on FanDuel, it's $200 back using point spreads, money lines, whatever you're looking for. You can even pick who's going to win it all. Visit us at FanDuel.com/lockedon. And bet your college hoops until they cut down the nets right now on FanDuel. As we get closer to the draft, I always start to have, permutation anxiety. I will be up until 2 a.m. some of these nights running mocks until I can't see straight. But the one thing that this draft is different for me than it has been in most years is going back to the philosophy that we just talked about in being able to go to a game as you are before the draft. This year, I feel like the round one pick needs to have more impact than it has recently. in terms of last year's 32nd pick, even going back to a mid-20s pick. And especially if the Chiefs are able to acquire any kind of pick in the second or third round, day 2 selection for L'Jarius Sneed. That to me, Matt, tells me that, yes, I always prefer to have volume and throw more selections at a given need, like we just talked about the linebackers and the backup guards who could have to ascend to a starting role. It's the left tackle position that right now I feel warrants a trade up. How likely do you think is that the Chiefs see it that way, and how would you approach this position?
Yeah, I mean, obviously it's a little early and everything for me to be able to at least start pegging where specific players are going to go. But, you always say to yourself, okay, wait a minute, you're sitting at 32, no matter how deep a class is, you're not normally going to get a player with a first round grade, at least not one that you have a first round grade on at 32. I mean, Brett Veach has typically said, hey, in any given year, maybe 15 to 20 players are ones that they have first round grades on. And it's just the rare circumstance when one of those guys falls. Trent McDuffie fell for them a couple of years ago. They went up and they were able to get him. Is there a left tackle that's going to fall? That, unfortunately, it's at such a premium position that it usually doesn't happen. Yeah. So, if you're sitting at 22, if you're trying to move up, I mean, if you're moving up to get a player at, say, 22, is that going to be the third best left tackle, the fourth, fifth, or sixth? I mean, that makes a difference. So, I mean, I can't see the Chiefs I can't see them moving up for a left tackle unless it's somebody they believe is a first round grade. And in that case, I'll defer to you, Ryan, right now. I mean, is that 3 or 4 players maybe in that position?
Maybe 5.
Maybe 5.
I have one guy at 33 right now.
And that's too low. I mean, that's one, if you're the Chiefs, you're certainly not moving up to get a guy that you think is a second round pick. So, there's maybe 3 or 4 players that, you would be willing to move up for. But then you get to 32 and then you're kind of in no man's land. If you're the Chiefs, do you take a risk of, if you don't have the player that you want? And that's the other thing is that, do you have the currency to move up if you want to? If you trade L'Jarius Sneed, maybe you do have the currency to at least move up a few selections. My guy Nick Jacobs and I, we had a little scenario planned out, where, hey, if you could trade L'Jarius for a first round pick, you could get top 10 and go draft Joe Alt. Not going to happen. So
no. I like the way you and Nick think, but no.
Yeah, that's the dream. That's the dream scenario, but not going to happen. So, now do you do kind of what they did in 2016, which was, hey, we've got an opportunity to move back, get some spots, still get Chris Jones, which worked out for them. Not going to work out necessarily every year, but does that become a scenario where if you're Brett Veach and you want more draft picks? And that's why I think that there's probably more likelihood that he trades down from 32 than trades up, especially if for no other reason than I think there's only about maybe a 3 or a 4 pick range of some NFC teams that are drafting in the 20s that might be willing to trade with the Chiefs. I find it hard to believe that any AFC team is going to trade with the Chiefs, especially in the 20s, because I think they're just too afraid who the Chiefs are going to take. They don't want it to be anybody who's going to make them better.
Right?
Yeah.
Especially after we know the follow from the Steelers. I agree with you completely.
Exactly.
Pick 19 is the one that I'm targeting right now. Is if they go up, it has to be 19 to get something done that actually fits their board, like you said. So that's the hard part. So as you said, though, in reverse, you can throw options at it. You can throw multiple selections at it. And I agree. That's always my preference unless there's a reason to go up. So in that case, you could see multiple wide receivers. You could see multiple offensive linemen in the top 100. You move out of one and you have the L'Jarius pick. And that's why I think, folks, for those of you who are like, why are you talking about L'Jarius Sneed so much? Because it's not just about L'Jarius in the secondary. L'Jarius and the pick that you give for him buys you an opportunity to get a left tackle. That's the big impact here. And so without that, I think it has to be multiple players that you bring in for competition. You find what it is. I'm okay if they end up without a first round pick and 4 top 100 still. Is that a viable offshoot for you?
I mean, it would be, absolutely. And that I think would be a great scenario for Brett Veach to have, because if you have that kind of depth of draft picks at your availability, now you've really got the ability to move around the board and maneuver where you want to. And and remember, they got 2 5th-round picks. The 7th rounder is not really that important that they've got back, but it's important in the sense that the Chiefs can hit the 7th round because they've shown that ability. So, but it's not like it's a valuable trade commodity. But the Chiefs can always turn it into more than it is. But if they were able to get something a little bit more for Sneed, that does give them the ability to move a bit. I just think it's going to be really difficult for them to move up in the first round. Even, going to 19, I would worry that, is that going to require a first this year and a first next year, kind of a move. And if the player you want, honestly, if you're going up and you think that there is a 10-year left tackle there, that's worth it. Absolutely worth it. But, it isn't always that clear cut. So it can be difficult to make those decisions. So, and then it comes back to, once again, you make a deal like that and you're no longer shooting numbers at it. Now you're taking one shot at it. Yep. And that can be more difficult. But then again, if we're the Chiefs and we're sitting back here and we're thinking, okay, well, let's say they take a tackle in the 2nd round, and now you're talking about having 2 tackles that you take in the last couple of years. Only one of them may be playing for you. Are you hoping that one of them is going to be replacing Jawan Taylor at the right side here down the road? That's got to be your math and calculations, because Jawan Taylor, and this is not a knock on him, but his contract and his existence in Kansas City is what happens when you don't draft for the position and you don't hit, because then you end up with a hole in your roster that you have to do what Britt Veach said, which was, we don't have a left tackle, we don't have a right tackle. Take a blank contract and hand it to the agent for the best tackle available. That's how they ended up with Jawan Taylor.
And that's how they have to base everything going forward, not just this season, but next season as well, in order to try to get out of that hole. That's why all this team building, folks, has to be planned out. It's not just the draft. It's how everything comes together from the day the Super Bowl ends until the day the first draft pick comes off the board. We're going to have it all for you here on Locked On Chiefs. I'll have it at every outlet that I have. Make sure you subscribe over at NFL33.com and get your pre-order in at rogueapc.com. But you have to watch Chiefs Digest here on the YouTube platform and read all of Matt's insight at chiefsdigest.com. Matt, thanks again for setting me straight and taking the tinfoil off my head sometimes.
Hey, I like the way you think a lot of the time, right?
Well, it's definitely unique. We appreciate you folks. Enjoy the rest of your week. We're going to have content for you as always, and we're getting ready not only for everything else that we do, but next week we will be back with another mock draft. Enjoy